Good afternoon. It is Monday, May 10th, and this is the Vermont General Assembly Joint Rules Committee. And this afternoon, the conversation, our agenda item is around how we conduct our joint committees and hearings and joint assemblies together after the end of the session. So I'll just start by doing a level set just to make sure we're all on the same page, and then we'll get started with some questions for the group. So there is consensus between the House and the Senate that we will continue to work remotely through May 22nd and for the potential override session if needed, which we hope it won't be, on June 23rd and 24th. And now the question is, where do we go for joint rules from that point? There have been many conversations about who makes these decisions given all the various committees that we have. So after consulting with Legislative Counsel, the House Clerk, and the Senate Secretary, we begin to pull together a roadmap in which committees have what jurisdiction with decision making. So the committees that we're talking about right now are Joint Rules and Joint Legislative Management Committee. And then in the House Capital Bill, I know that the chairs of the two committees, Senator Benning and Representative Emmons, have been talking about and working on language to expand and change State House Advisory Committee to help really make decisions about the building itself and the infrastructure, from air quality to how we can set up our committee rooms and space so that it's safe for people. And I think our goal through this whole process is to ensure that when we come back, we're doing it in a way that puts public health and safety first. So that committee, I know, is under discussion, and I believe in the latest draft, that advisory committee would provide some recommendations to both Joint Legislative Management Committee and Joint Rules Committee. So so the House received Joint Resolution 24 from the Senate, which stated that any joint committees or assemblies would happen remotely until the end of the governor's state of emergency or the beginning of next legislative session, whatever happens later. The House Rules Committee has looked at the resolution, and the House right now, and I know things are evolving, so things could be different, are looking at a different take in how we reconvene. So again, we have consensus that we're remote through the 22nd and through a potential veto session. And so I just want to brief this committee about the latest conversation House Rules had, which was to say, well, why don't we use the governor's state of emergency as a trigger? So when that state of emergency is lifted, we will come back to in-person 30 days after, because we want to make sure that we have the time to do the work to get us set up. And that was the recommendation that we got from the Sergeant at Arms and the Director of IT. And we also just wanted to make sure that there wasn't any resurgences or any issues that came out of reopening. Because again, we want to make sure that when we come back, we're putting public health and safety first. So we are going to have a House Rules Committee meeting tomorrow morning to vote on that language. And I think the other addition that's really important is that we're providing a provision around alternative procedures. So for example, let's say that it is safe for us to come back and be together in the building. But for example, the House chamber, knowing how many people we have to put in there, let's say there's an issue with the air quality and we can't meet, it's not safe for us to meet in person, but we still want to meet in person. This gives us the authority to come up with a way to, whether it's Berry Auditorium or wherever, to find a space that's safe for us to meet, that allows full access from the public and the media. So I'll just quickly look at my House colleagues to see if there's anything to add from those conversations. Did I get everything? Okay. So with that, our mission here today is how we come together remote or jointly. So we're talking about joint committees, joint hearings, and joint sessions. So I think the first question for this group is, after the veto session, what is the trigger for these groups to come back? Is it the direction that the House is going, or does the Senate have a different stance and different take? We'll start the conversation there. Senator Ballin?
So just curious, in your conversations with House Rules, have you contemplated joint committees, joint hearings, and joint sessions this summer and fall that were hybrid? Was that part of the conversation?
I would say that we talked briefly about that people would be there. We talked about it in that, what would we do if we were in person, which was, yeah, people could come in by phone or by Zoom if they needed to.
Okay.
But the preference, the defaults that were in person. Representative McCoy?
Yeah, I just also, one more thing, Jill, I don't know if you mentioned that we did meet with the Sergeant at Arms and Kevin Moore, who assured us they could be up and running with 4 rooms completely set up with the distancing requirements and all the IT and everything. So.
Yeah, thank you, Representative McCoy. Senator Brock, did I see your hand? Go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
There we go.
There you go.
Just a general question. We do obviously have some joint committees that will be meeting throughout the summer, and we need to take care of those. And what we do for the body as a whole might be different than what we do for joint committees. I think one of the things that we also need to think about for the long term is we've just had a year of showing that we can do a lot of things remotely that we've never done before. And one of the questions that we might want to put in the back of our minds is, do we want to simply flip a switch, or do we want to at least study the notion that maybe it might make sense on occasion, under certain circumstances or certain portions of the week or certain committees, that we may do things remotely, again, provided the public continues to have access. It's just something that is worth thinking about for the future and not dismissing out of hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the reasons why there's interest in allowing joint committees and House committees is that we want to make sure that we are able to test what it looks like and work with staff and literally the building to see what this transition looks like for us, so that we've had a way to kind of test things out before we come back in January. But I think, Senator Brock, to your point, I think there's nothing that would restrict us from coming back as a joint rules committee if something has gone completely wrong and there's a new issue that we don't know about right now that pops up. I think we have the flexibility to come back if there is a problem. Yeah, go ahead.
My point is simply this, that legislatures in general have always been considered bodies that think in the past. We have learned from this pandemic that there are lots of things we can do that we never did before. And I think it would be a mistake simply to throw that out, go back to the past without taking the time to think through whether or not times have changed.
Secretary Bloomer and then Senator Clarkson.
I can't wait till after the senator's done.
Senator Clarkson and then Secretary Bloomer.
John, you were next.
So polite.
Okay. So I just wanted to raise a couple things, and some of it plays up Senator Brock. The first thing would be if you're, which Madam Speaker, you mentioned, if you're planning to meet outside of the building, you may have to make sure that Betsy Ann or the clerk and I kind of backfill some of that. As you know from the, maybe coming back this past January, there's a statute that says you're supposed to meet in the State House. There maybe should be some steps taken to make sure that everything is sort of the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. And I'm not necessarily as familiar with that as Betsy Ann is, but I want to make sure you have time to get that done, and it may have to be done before you adjourn. The second point would be to Senator Brock's, and I may be, I don't know if I'm in the minority or the majority on this, but I believe the joint rules decides what happens with joint committees. Each chamber individually decides whether they come back or not. So if Senator Brock and the Senate Rules Committee wanted to do a hybrid, I think they have the ability to do that even if the House comes back completely in person or not. But this committee deals with joint sort of detente or diplomacy between the two chambers and joint rules. But that the request of Senator Brock, I think, could be still done within the Senate, even if the House decided to take a different path.
Mhm. Senator Clarkson.
Thank you, Jill. I think it's an interesting idea to have the joint summer committees be guinea pigs for how, and for how we might roll out starting again in January. I guess my concern is that 30 days for the Sergeant at Arms to solve all the or put in place with IT all the same access that we've had through Zoom is going to be a bit of a challenge. I mean, so I'm just curious that 30 days just seems like a very short time to get, because one of the things, as we all know, we've been afforded in Zoom land is unprecedented public access. We've had more public but it's because the public can dial in through YouTube and actually experience everything. We are so not set up for that fully in the State House yet. And the cost point on that is yet to be determined. And how we could even wire 4 rooms. I think Patty talked about 4 possible test sites or rooms that could be wired up for this. I mean, the cost on that, I mean, if we looked at what the cost of that would be and or would that be a hybrid so that the public would be participating in some hybrid fashion? So I guess I'm full of questions, but I think in general, it's not a bad idea to have have joint committees be a guinea pig for what
Yep.
we'll be looking at for the winter.
Agree. All great questions, Senator Clarkson. So when we adjourned last biennium, there was actually a lot of prep work done to anticipate a possible hybrid model, depending on how the pandemic was going. So there was money set aside for equipment purchases, and the State House has actually already been in several rooms set up for a hybrid model. And so that was at the end of last biennium. And then last week, as House Rules met, we had Kevin Moore and Janet Miller in to ask about that. And we already have the equipment for a base setup, which would be, if you picture a committee sitting around the table right now, it's set up to be linked up with Zoom and YouTube. And right now it's 2 cameras, one facing at the committee and then the other at the witness. And so that's what we currently have in terms of IT setup. Kevin has talked about purchasing equipment, and this is a question for JLMC that we're working on, that I think the direction we're moving in is to approve IT department to buy cameras that are sensitive to who is speaking, to make it a more dynamic experience. So you're not just seeing like this one video feed on the committee and one on the witness, but that it is responsive to whomever is speaking. And I think that's a great example of how we can improve on our IT and test it out as well. So I think he said as soon as we give the authority to buy those, it would take about 90 days to get them purchased, to get them here, and to get those prepped, which still gives us within the timeline of let's say August. And if you think it would be helpful, we could absolutely have another meeting in the next 2 days where we bring in Kevin and Janet to talk more about space. Secretary Bloomer?
Just a suggestion, if you do that, there are at least 2 committee rooms set up in the State House, rooms 9 and 10 and 11. You may actually want to run the meeting from there and just so you can actually see it. I believe the equipment's all still there, but if people have concerns about what it might look like, you can try to light up one of those rooms and have maybe even the Sergeant at Arms testify from that room if you want to kind of see how it works with the equipment you already have.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking around our virtual table here. Would that be helpful for our next step? Is to bring them in and to experience this space? Okay. All right. Yeah, go ahead, Senator Clarkson.
Thank you. But that goes to my question, which is Kevin is talking about it taking 90 days to get that operational. We may want to start that ASAP given the time, given where we are. We may not want to wait for an emergency declaration to be done. We may not want to wait. We may just want to move ahead and I don't know what authority the Joint Legislative Management Committee has in terms of spending money, but it does strike me that somebody, and I don't know what the cost is. We don't know what the cost is, but it would be great to see if Kevin, between Kevin and Janet, we were able to actually create 2 experimental rooms, 2 committee rooms, that one House, one Senate maybe, and obviously the big joint ones, to see how that, just to see it in action and actually put 2 into play, as it were.
Yep. I think, and I'll look at the pro tem here and then I'll take it over to Representative McCoy, but the issue of technology is definitely on the minds and agenda of JLMC. And my understanding is that we do have money set aside in the budget for IT purchases. Kevin estimates that one of these machines cost around $1,000, and that includes the mics that go along with it.
You mean the rotating, the
Camera.
AI, the artificial intelligently clever camera that would move
That's
to
correct.
whoever.
I don't know the name, the technical name for it. If anyone else does, I'll let them jump in, but you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, Senator Ballant, do you have anything to add before I turn it over to Representative McCoy?
Oh, I would just say, Senator Clarkson, that you are right. If we were starting the clock from July 1st, which we anticipate the day by which the governor is going to lift the order if things continue to go as they are. But these conversations are ongoing. For those of us the few of us who have been in the building know that work has been done in the building to get us ready for this. So it would be a continuation of work that was already started. They're not starting from scratch. So, but you're absolutely right. We want to make sure we give the staff the time they need to get it right.
Representative McCoy, and then
Yes.
Senator Mazza.
And this is an additional new purchase that what Kevin was speaking to us on Thursday or Friday, whenever we met, was they already have equipment that would be the 2-camera angle that people could see the committee room, and a separate camera already for the witness to testify. They already have that. It's just a matter of, my understanding was a lot of this equipment is at 133 State Street in some of those rooms, simply moving them back to the State House and setting up a couple of additional rooms here. That, I think that's what my sense was from Kevin on Friday.
Yeah, that's
But
correct.
yeah, but they did say that, as soon as possible, but they didn't they didn't have an issue at all saying August. They could make it happen.
Mhm.
So,
Senator Mazza. Oh, you're muted, Senator.
After listening a couple hours last week in Institutions Committee from the press, I just want to make sure that they have access to whatever we do, because we spent 2 hours listening, and we spent 2 hours also listening to lobbyists also, but they were just adamant about, make sure we get access in however shape or form. So
Yep.
As long as that's taken care of, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And all of these conversation is, we need to, and we continue to take into account how we ensure full access for press and how we create access in a safe way for the public. And so we have talked about setting up overflow rooms that would be wired up so that we continue to be socially distanced as whatever the CDC health guidelines are, to accommodate space to make sure that those who want to be there can in a safe way. Okay. So committee, what I'm hearing and what I'm thinking makes sense is if we get another meeting on the books with Kevin and Janet, and what I can do is I can send out to you like 3 to 5 questions that we want to try to answer at the next meeting so that we can get guidance for a resolution for us to pass so that we know and can prepare people for how joint committees, hearings, and assemblies would work. Does that sound like a good plan? Is there anything or anyone else people would like to hear from or add? Senator Clarkson.
Sorry to be so full of
No,
questions. I guess it's lunchtime and I like full of questions. So what's the discussion been to date about people accessing the building who haven't been vaccinated? What is your thinking around requiring vaccination or not for entrance to the building?
In terms of,
So,
sorry.
oh, have you had this conversation with, you haven't? Okay. So I've had just preliminary conversations with the Sergeant at Arms about what she was thinking for best practice without asking any specific pointed questions. Her thought at the moment was that she would want people to have to wear a mask in the building. As you know, the air quality in the building, and especially in certain corners of it, is not good to begin with, let alone a pandemic. And so I think she's still working with staff on what those recommendations would look like, but she did say that she would have masks required, and she was working on what that would look like. Senator Ballant, do you have anything to add?
No, just that I think we as the speaker and I haven't had a conversation about this. We haven't talked to Joint Legislative Management and how this interacts with the staff in the building. Obviously, there are a lot of issues involved here, especially if the governor lifts the order. We're no longer under an emergency order. I'm not certain whether at that point, whether if the governor is lifting recommendations around mask wearing, it's certainly, we have to think very carefully if we do something within the State House that runs counter to the emergency order. So I just think there are a lot of issues involved here, and I just want to be clear, we're at the very beginning stages of talking about this.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. At the very beginning, and still has a lot of process and steps to go through. Okay. Any other thoughts or feedback before we wrap? All right, so members, be on the lookout for an email from Betsy with our next meeting, and I'll get those questions organized and sent out to you so you can think about those beforehand. And we'll meet again shortly. Thank you, everyone.